If this sounds like a political bombshell, pause. The danger isn't in the explosion. It's in what fails to detonate. What matters here isn't that a powerful figure made an accusation. What matters is that a system designed to respond to accusations like this has gone still. When a headline suggests exposure, the real test is not whether names are spoken, but whether institutions move when they are. That's the pressure point we're standing on now. And it's why this moment cannot be treated as spectacle or gossip or social media theater. Elon Musk did not whisper. He didn't leak to a reporter or hide behind an anonymous document dump. He placed a claim into public space that carries specificity, timing, and implied access to records. In any other era, that combination would have triggered a familiar sequence: preliminary inquiries, quiet requests for verification, back-channel confirmations, and eventually a formal acknowledgement that a matter was under review. None of that has happened. The absence is the story. When silence follows specificity, prosecutors don't hear restraint. They hear avoidance. Let's slow this down to the speed that law actually moves. When someone publicly links a sitting president to a known federal sex trafficking investigation, prosecutors don't start by asking whether the claim is politically inconvenient. They ask whether it is testable. Can it be corroborated? Can it be falsified? Flight logs are not opinions. Photographs are not vibes. Timelines are not rhetoric. These are the raw materials of inquiry. And when a claim is built out of materials that can be authenticated, the legal system has a reflex, or at least it is supposed to. This is where the title's implication starts to feel insufficient. Exposure suggests revelation, but much of what is being referenced here was never hidden in the sense of being unknown. Epstein's network was an open secret in elite circles for years. His relationships with powerful men were photographed, logged, joked about, and quietly normalized. What was hidden was the willingness to connect those relationships to legal consequence. The exposure, if there is one, isn't of facts. It's of a pattern of non-action. From a prosecutorial perspective, the first instinct is not outrage, it's triage. You isolate the claim and strip it of narrative heat. Who is making it? What do they have access to? What exactly are they asserting happened and when? Musk's position complicates that analysis. He is not a marginal actor. He operates companies embedded in federal contracting, national security infrastructure, and regulated industries. He lives inside clearance regimes where false statements carry consequences. That doesn't make him infallible. It does make him legible to investigators. They know how to evaluate him. Then comes corroboration. Epstein's aviation records have been examined before. Some were introduced in court. Others were referenced but never fully litigated. Prosecutors know where to look. The FAA maintains records. Charter companies keep manifests. Pilots talk, eventually. Staff members age out of loyalty. None of this is mysterious. What is unusual is the decision not to look, especially after a public assertion reframes old material with new urgency. Timing matters here in a way that a headline can't capture. Epstein's death in 2019 did not end the investigation into his associates. It narrowed it. The Southern District of New York continued to examine co-conspirators. Ghislaine Maxwell's indictment in 2020 and conviction in 2021 proved that the government believed a broader venture existed. But that belief stopped short of naming others, even as evidence suggested a network rather than a duo. Prosecutors don't usually stop at one node unless something external intervenes. That external factor was power. By the time Maxwell was charged, the executive branch was controlled by someone whose name appeared, however peripherally, in the orbit of Epstein's social and travel history. Control of the Justice Department is not symbolic. It is operational. U.S. attorneys serve at the pleasure of the president. Attorneys general set priorities. Career prosecutors feel pressure even when no one speaks it aloud. The system does not need an explicit order to understand where its limits are. This is where the narrative shifts from scandal to structure. The question stops being whether a relationship existed and becomes whether the system was capable of examining it. When a president controls the machinery that would investigate him, independence becomes theoretical. We tell ourselves that norms will hold, that professionals will resist. Sometimes they do, often they calculate. That calculation is invisible, but its results are not. Consider the earlier chapter that always resurfaces in this story. In 2008, Epstein received a non-prosecution agreement in Florida that defied the gravity of the allegations against him. The deal was engineered by federal prosecutors and shielded from victims through secrecy. One of the officials involved later ascended to a cabinet position. That is not a coincidence in the way civilians use the word. In legal culture, it is context. It tells you how leniency was rewarded, not punished. Fast forward to 2019. Epstein is arrested again, this time under a different jurisdiction with a different prosecutorial culture. The case is stronger, the political environment is more volatile. Then Epstein dies in federal custody under circumstances that remain unresolved. Officially, the system shrugs and moves on. Unofficially, prosecutors understand what just happened. A defendant who could have flipped is gone. Leverage evaporates. Incentives collapse. What Musk's statement does, intentionally or not, is reintroduce leverage from the outside. It creates a public record that cannot be quietly buried without cost. Prosecutors are trained to think in terms of future exposure. Even if charges are not brought now, the question becomes whether today's inaction will be tomorrow's scandal. Files age. Administrations change. Silence leaves fingerprints. There is also a misunderstanding that needs to be corrected, because it is often exploited to shut down inquiry. Statutes of limitations do not mean accountability has expired. They mean certain charges may no longer be viable. Others remain. Obstruction, false statements, conspiracy to conceal evidence, witness tampering. These are separate offenses with their own clocks. A cover-up is not protected by the passage of time in the same way underlying conduct might be. Federal sex trafficking law itself is broader than most people realize. Under 18 U.S.C. Part 1591, liability is not limited to those who directly commit abuse. Knowingly benefiting from participation in a venture engaged in trafficking can create exposure. Knowledge can be inferred from circumstances. Continued association after awareness becomes relevant. This is why timelines matter so much. They establish when ignorance stops being plausible. None of this requires an assumption of guilt. Prosecutors do not start with conclusions. They start with questions. Did this person know? When did they know it? What did they do after they knew? Those questions are answerable. Or they would be if the system were willing to ask them without fear. That fear is the quiet horror here. It doesn't announce itself with sirens or indictments. It manifests as delay, deflection, and procedural excuses. Requests for more information that never come. Jurisdictional puzzles that are never solved. Public statements that emphasize closure rather than curiosity. Over time, these tactics create a reality where accountability is discussed more than it is practiced. Watch the reactions carefully, because they are diagnostic. A flat denial accompanied by transparency would look like confidence. Release the records, invite review, cooperate with independent scrutiny. That would be the posture of someone unafraid of what an investigation might find. An attack on the accuser, by contrast, signals something else. In courtrooms, credibility attacks are often the refuge of those who cannot rebut facts. Silence, though, is the most telling response of all. Silence communicates that engaging carries risk. This is not unprecedented. History offers examples of powerful figures insulated from scrutiny until they weren't. Organized crime bosses evaded accountability for decades, not because evidence was absent, but because witnesses were afraid and institutions were compromised. When that changed, prosecutions followed patterns that had been visible all along. The delay did not absolve the conduct. It magnified the consequences. The Enron prosecutions tell a similar story. For years, manipulation was rationalized as innovation. Regulators hesitated. Political relationships blurred lines. When the reckoning came, it was not because the behavior suddenly changed. It was because the political will did. Evidence that had existed for years became actionable once independence returned. This is why the current moment is so precarious. If credible allegations involving a sitting president and a notorious criminal network can be floated and then ignored without explanation, a precedent is set. Not in law books, but in behavior. Future officials will learn that proximity to power confers insulation. That lesson is corrosive. It teaches institutions to manage appearances rather than pursue truth. There is another layer here that rarely gets discussed publicly because it is uncomfortable. Prosecutors are human. They have careers, families, futures. When the person potentially implicated controls appointments, budgets, and internal discipline, courage becomes expensive. Some will still choose it. Many will not. Systems that rely on heroism rather than structure eventually fail. This is where the title's suggestion of unraveling needs refinement. What appears to be personal destabilization may actually be institutional decay. A president does not need to panic publicly for damage to occur. Damage happens when norms erode quietly, when extraordinary claims no longer trigger ordinary processes, when the absence of action becomes normalized. The real exposure here is of that normalization. Musk's intervention is less about revealing new facts than about forcing a question back onto the table that the system thought it had safely retired. Why were certain avenues never pursued? Who decided that? On what basis? Those questions linger even if no charges are filed. They linger because they are about governance, not personalities. It is also important to resist the temptation to turn this into a binary narrative of heroes and villains. That framing obscures responsibility. The Justice Department is not a monolith, but it is an institution with memory. Choices made in one administration shape behavior in the next. When accountability is deferred, it rarely disappears. It waits. What happens next will tell us more than any headline. If records quietly surface through litigation or reporting, it will suggest that internal resistance exists. If legislative bodies initiate inquiries, it will indicate that other branches recognize the vacuum. If nothing happens, if the moment passes and attention shifts, that will be the most consequential outcome of all. Because then the lesson will be learned, clearly and irrevocably, that there are names so powerful they can be spoken aloud without consequence, that evidence can be referenced without being examined, that the rule of law is conditional, not universal. Those are not abstract concerns. They shape behavior at every level of society. By the end of this, the title may feel too mild. Exposure implies light. What we are seeing is shadow management, the careful containment of risk through inaction, the preservation of authority by declining to test it. That is more dangerous than scandal because it trains the public to expect less and accept it. So pay attention not to the noise, but to the process, or the lack of one. Notice who asks questions and who doesn't. Notice which doors stay closed. This isn't about believing any one claim. It's about watching whether the system still knows how to respond when belief is not the standard, but verification is. Stay present as this develops, because the next move will tell you whether this was an aberration or a template. Understand the follow-through, not just the moment, because that is where the real meaning of this episode will be decided.